Hi there, everybody. This is Queso, and this is the Queso You Didn't Know podcast. Joining me, as always, is the incomparable.
Alberto Simpson.
Now, as I'm sure all of you will remember, last week we started a story on a little man named Robert Smalls. We covered his time in the war. We covered his sick ass escape with the CSS Planter. We covered how he turned it over to the Federal Navy, how he became the first black captain in the Navy's history, how he started to use that pull he had to boycott the transit system of Pennsylvania into becoming less segregated. And we told you we were going to come back with a part two that covers his crazy, crazy adventures post-war and how he kind of leveraged his war hero status into being a force against nature as far as construction and reconstruction in America goes. Anything you got to say on this, Alberto? Any interests? Anything that piques your curiosity? Anything you remember from last week that you wanted to bring up?
Well, just overall, that this is somebody who, again, affected the direction of the whole world. It could have really went either way for the next 250 plus years, all because of this guy. And that's not something to be overlooked at all and to be put in the context of just some guy who kicked up dust during the Civil War era.
Kicked up a whole lot of dust. I definitely know what you mean, sir. And he kept kicking up dust afterwards because after the war ended, Smalls immediately returned to his native Beaufort, South Carolina. Beaufort, which had been captured by the Union Navy in 1861, became an early symbol of Reconstruction's success, with formerly enslaved people purchasing and building homes, and the city flourishing as a center for black political and social life. Smalls capitalized on this unique environment by leveraging his prize money from the planter to purchase the mansion of his former enslaver, Henry McKee, in January 1864. The property was acquired during a tax auction of properties belonging to white residents who had fled the area when the city fell to Union forces. Small's purchase of the home where he was born into bondage provided him with immediate financial independence, property, and capital, a vital foundation for his political future. This act was a profound symbolic reversal of the antebellum power structure, transforming him from enslaved property to property owner and war hero, and a notable demonstration of compassion. Smalls later permitted his former enslaver, Mrs. McKee, to reside in the house after the purchase. The home remained in the Smalls family until 1953. Smalls' ownership of the property was challenged in court in 1875 by the McKee's heirs, leading to the landmark case de Treville versus Smalls. Smalls successfully defended his title all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled in his favor. This legal victory secured the property and underscored the legal standing of black property ownership achieved during Reconstruction. This sustained focus on economic self-determination provided Smalls with the necessary independence and local credibility to maintain a political career for decades, partially shielding him from the economic coercion frequently faced by black politicians dependent on white landowners. Recognizing that political freedom required a foundation of economic and intellectual infrastructure, Smalls focused on community development in Beaufort shortly after the Civil War. He went into business with Richard Howe Gleaves, opening a general store that catered the needs of free men. In 1867, he purchased a two-story building to establish a school for African American children, emphasizing the necessity of education for his newly emancipated community. To foster political mobilization and communication, Smalls also published and edited the local newspaper, the Beaufort Southern Standard, starting in 1872. Furthermore, he extended his entrepreneurial efforts beyond Beaufort, co-founding the Enterprise Railroad Company of Charleston, a horse-drawn network connecting various depots and wharves.
When I hear about Beaufort, it kind of makes me think that I'm sure later on down the line, because this is still the 1800s, it became one of those places that, and these places probably existed during the 1800s as well, but they're more talked about in the early 20th century. Just those Black Wall Street, thriving Black community type of places, because it wasn't, places like that wasn't limited to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but also right here in St. Louis. Wellston used to be an area like that. And California, just all over. And it's really what comes about when you have a people who are just forced to make the best, who overall just forced to make the best out of what they have. And through them doing that, ironically, they end up just becoming stronger. And part of that is because thanks to segregation, blacks had to deal with other blacks on all levels, basically, and that included financial levels. So they had to buy and trade with each other, which only increased our finances.
Well, that's why America historically is just such a funny thing to watch because and when you look at TV and stuff, for example, you're just now starting to see like more Latino made shows and more black made shows coming up and getting a good foothold in the community where it's like, but if y'all did this 60 years ago, you could be billionaires today because like the black community and Latino community have a lot of money to spend and they're the fastest growing communities in America and have been for, like you said, 250 years. And the amount of money that they were leaving on the table. And then it is kind of sad that, as you said, it gives you this increased financial ability and you learn to trade within your community and it builds you up and makes you stronger. But there's also that sick effect that it has that it puts a target on your back then from the white community, like Tulsa.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just be real. There's always criticisms that are necessary, that have a place, that can be made about the way that blacks are portrayed. But if I'm really thinking about it, I mean, blacks in America, of course, it's not a cakewalk. But as far as our portrayal and our representation, I think not only do we have it better than other races in some cases, but I mean, in lots of cases, but I think really we really kind of get it. I think people at this point know what the black experience is. And not only that, they know the variety of the black experience. Like they know that there's shows like The Cosby Show that reflect black reality just as much as there's shows like Good Times. Now, like I said, sometimes we're oversaturated with a certain image that can be considered stereotypical. But I mean, that doesn't really weed out the fact that most, at least smart people, have a clear knowledge of what the overall representation is of Black society, and that it's not a monolith. You know what I mean? And
Exactly, yes. That
if
you
I'm
can go
being
from the Proud Family to Sanford and Son and everything in between, right?
right, right. And overall, if I'm being real, like I've never seen or heard of anybody talking about their sitcom based on an Asian family or based on an Asian person or something. I mean, wait a minute. Does the Big Bang Theory count in that? I guess.
With an Asian, I don't think they have Asians on the Big Bang Theory.
I mean, yeah, the Indian guy.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess technically he's Indian, but
I'm
like, well, because they had that show Fresh Off the Boat that got really big for a while because it was showing just a normal Chinese family. That you are right in the sense there are certain cultures in America that are still underrepresented.
Yeah, and as far as black people go, like we've been having people of all races that have shows that are near and dear to their heart that they love since the 70s, loving that shit. Like there's people of all races that can say they appreciate Sanford and Son, Good Times, The Jeffersons, fucking Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Martin. Like I can go down the line forever and ever, but you get the point.
Or
Like,
even in the 60s, because they had Uhura, the female on Star Trek, and they were interviewing her once, and she said, yeah, I was thinking about quitting the show. I don't want to be a part of it. So she was at a NAACP meeting one day. It was like a dinner thing they were doing. And she's getting ready to leave. And she goes, somebody taps me on the shoulder and said, hey, I want you to know I heard you were thinking about leaving. And me and my daughters love your show. And she goes, I thought it was going to be a nerd or something. I'd stand up and look back. It's Martin Luther King. He goes, I love the fact that you're showing my little girl she doesn't have to be a doctor or a housemaid to be able to be something that she could be proud of. You're not the one running the ship, but you're also not the one cleaning the ship. You're right in the middle, and I love that. And it's like you said, it's kind of amazing to think that even in the 60s, you had such an effect on culture as a woman on TV in that way.
mhm. And just overall stuff like that. And as far as Latinos go, yeah, you got the George Lopez show, but I'm trying to think of some stuff outside of that. I mean, Cheech and Chong, yeah, but overall, it's like what I'm really trying to say, just like on some podcasts back when I talked about how Mexicans and Chinese people have something in common to where it's like they're the premier ethnicity for their race. Like when a lot of people when they think of the word Asian, first thing they zoom to mentally is Chinese, you know, or they call every Oriental at least Asian person that they see Chinese, even when they very well may not be. Same thing for Mexicans and stuff like that. It's like what people immediately mentally zoom to when they hear Latino or whatever. But if I really look at it, as much shit as we go through as Black Americans here, I can really say that we are the premier minority.
That's fair. That's fair when you put it that way and the way you broke it down. I mean, I guess I never thought of it in that way that while Latinos and Hispanics are a little we're starting to get more representation, but we're more underrepresented than you think the fastest growing population in a country would be, but it's changing. And you're definitely right on the Asian American front that it's even more lacking. And I know there may not be as many Asian Americans as Latino Americans or the Black community. You know, I guess that's kind of starting to change too. That you're seeing things pop up like the Crazy Rich Asians and things like that.
That's the show.
It's a movie they did. It was a movie that was really popular for a time.
Okay, because I was like, yeah, I heard of that at some point. I was like, where did I hear of that at? But yeah, just, that's definitely the case, and it makes you think because I mean, Latinos have been the dominant minority numerically for a little over a decade now. I remember my first time hearing about that. It was in 2012. Never forget Mr. Annie's class, current events. I remember him breaking it down, and he put it in the term of words to where it's like we've officially turned the corner of America in a sense that America is no longer black and white with little sprinkles of other races here and there. Even though, truthfully, it kind of seems that way still, just for the fact that, yeah, you're pretty much gonna, you can see some Latinos anywhere you go, really. But overall, yeah, they are the dominant minority numerically and shit, but they only exist like that in certain areas of the country. Like, you go out west, you go out southwest, and of course up the East Coast, specifically New York. Yeah, you're gonna see them in droves, but really, like for example, in St. Louis is still pretty much black and white with little sprinkles here and there. Like we got our little sprinkles. You already know in North County, specifically Florissant, we have our our little thick Asian population and shit, but it's mostly black and white.
And that's fair. That's fair. That is true. Now, I do got to segue back and ask you, and tell me, I don't know, there's something just so satisfying doing the research and reading this. What's your takeaway on it? Because I felt like it was something akin to like a Django movie where you hear, oh, he went back and bought his old slave master's house. There was something kind of satisfying about that.
Yeah, that's what I hear often. It's a concept I hear often. I wonder if you saw Medea's family reunion where Cicely Tyson has the little on-screen monologue talking about how her ancestors bought the home from their slave masters and shit. Yeah, it's a pretty triumphant type of move.
And then you got, I know it said like in the research I was doing, it sounded like he was more human than I might have been in the situation. But I can't help but feel like, yeah, I'd let the bitch move back in just to be like, it's my house now, bitch. You can live in the guest room.
Right. Yeah. Hey, but between me and you, all bullshit aside, what are wharves?
Docks, basically. Like when you go down to St. Louis and you see all the longshoremen, that's what a wharf would be considered.
Hmm. Okay.
dock can be like just where you park your boat, but a wharf is usually considered like a business industrialized dock, more or less.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Shout out to those guys, the longshoremen in particular.
I'm telling you, because this country will fall apart without them. We saw that.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that signs up to do a job that statistically at least one person a year dies doing that. Who, I mean, just to think, not to shit anybody's pants out of fear from signing up to do that, even though personally I never would because of
No.
history. But it's like signing up to do a job knowing that if you get it, you were pretty much playing Russian roulette.
I was
Like I
just gonna
said,
say, can you imagine you go to a kitchen for a job and they tell you, just so you know, at least one person in this kitchen a year dies.
like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, I'm out that bitch. I'm like, yeah, I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna try my chances at the restaurant down the street or something, because yeah, I'm not rolling the dice on the chance that one of those people are gonna be me.
Knowing my luck right, I'll be dead in the first month.
To hell with that. Yeah, so shout out to those guys and shout out to architecture and state policy.
Definitely a shout out to that, because let me tell you, Smalls transitioned quickly from military hero to political leader. He was one of the key founders of the South Carolina Republican Party. His status as a war hero, combined with his strong connections to the Gullah population, made him a natural lodestone for the thousands of freedmen seeking political leadership in the emerging Reconstruction era. In 1868, Smalls was elected as a delegate to the state constitutional convention. It was here and later in the South Carolina House of Representatives and State Senate, which he was elected to in 1872, that Smalls proved himself to be a brilliant policy architect. Smalls, having enhanced his own literacy through camp schools during the war, became a fervent champion of education. He was instrumental in authorizing and working to pass state legislation that provided for South Carolina to establish the first free and compulsory public school system in the United States, available to all children, black and white. He also supported the use of poll tax, viewed at the time as necessary for funding this public education system. Beyond education, Smalls recognized the legislative action needed to address the structural land inequality inherited from slavery. As a state legislator, he was instrumental in creating the Southern Carolina Land Commission in 1868. This commission was designed to finance and redistribute land to former slaves. From 1868 to 1879, this initiative resulted in property titles being transferred to approximately 14,000 black families, predominantly in the coastal rice-growing tidelands. These policies, compulsory public education and land commission, represent the high watermark of radical Reconstruction policy in South Carolina. They directly attack the foundational pillars of the Old South, planter land monopoly and illiteracy as a tool of oppression, showcasing Small's grasp of the necessary intellectual and economic foundations required for sustained political freedom.
Do you think it's stuff like this that really showcases an attack on certain theories that slave owners definitely had about slaves? Because being fresh out of slavery, conducting what I see as ingenious ideas and plans on how to conduct a meaningful society the way he's doing, I think it just abolishes the idea that these were just thoughtless beasts. You know what I mean?
I think he challenged the system in a way that broke the system bad enough that I think that might be why they tried to bury him in the annals of history, to be honest with you, because he definitely set the stage for 100 years later when you really started seeing the civil rights movement catch the steam it did. But I think it also, as you said, it made the Southern whites that still held a good sway of power very uncomfortable knowing that it was that easy for a man that they used to call property to become essentially their boss.
Yeah, and you never thought about stuff like that, but it makes you think that people who had that attitude weren't that way just because it was the time they lived in. It was that and certain events that happened in the time they lived in, how it just challenged and abolished and destroyed everything that they believed in such a way for people that not too long ago were your slaves and object of scorn to be people who live in such affluent societies and have a literacy rate that unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately because during those times and specifically during times I think in the 1800s, like not all that long after slavery at all, the Black American literacy rate was higher then than it is now. You know, like producing guys such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, producing these affluent societies, you know, like a generation, if not even that, out of slavery. It speaks for itself, honestly.
I think you saw a lot of future political movements come into play that tried to downplay that, not just for the black community, but for communities as a whole, because the more uneducated a population is, the easier it is to keep your fucking boot on their neck. But I definitely think that back then, you are 100,000% correct that education was viewed as the great equalizer. It was the thing that was going to make you just as powerful, if not even more powerful than your former oppressors. And I think it really broke a lot of these Southern people's brains because you think about, I've done a lot of reading on John Wilkes Booth, for example, and a big reason why he believed in slavery was because the same reason a lot of white people back then did, even if you didn't own a slave, it meant that even if you were the most unexceptional person in the world, in that caste system, there was still someone below you that you held power over. As the system starts crumbling, you lean way more into your beliefs even harder because it's the same thing if you joined a cult and I tried telling you it's a cult, you're crazy, Tolberto, and you've been doing this for 10 years, you're going to lean into it even harder and go, well, you know what? I'm going to drink the poison because I'm too invested in this now to say I was wrong.
Right, right. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. That's always been seen as the great equalizer as far as that goes. Just education overall. I mean, there's a reason why slaves would be killed for knowing how to read.
Yeah, and the whole, when people say knowledge is power, that shit is quite literal. Like, you cannot take away from that fact at all that there's people now, and it's kind of sad because I was looking into why male literacy rates in particular are so low. And a big part of it is they think that reading is feminine. And it's like, but dude, reading is the one thing that can make you the master of any domain. Like, how is that feminine?
Right. I mean, if you can read, you can essentially do anything. You can gain the instructions to perform any function. Like, I mean, if I wanted to direct videos or make movies or some shit like that, I would have to, you know, read some instructions on that, whether a book or somehow, you know. I mean, and it's funny you bring that up. I know we just kind of did the fluff and stuff, but I just got to bring this up because it's so timely. I don't know if the name Joel Santana rings a bell to you, but he did an interview recently talking about how just basically he believes that kids in today's world don't need to know how to read, that all they need is common sense and just overall street knowledge and shit like that. That bullshit. I'm like, I mean, yeah, all that's cool, but let's not downplay reading and let's not act like that doesn't have a lot of skill implemented in it and just the whole process of continually reading, paying attention, and while all at the same time comprehending what's being read back to you or what you're reading and digesting all that at the same time. It takes a lot and it's a process. It's an enriching process, you know. It feels like you're working out because you are. It's just not that type of muscle.
But it is a muscle and it needs worked out. You're dead on that. And I mean, you can only go so far on common sense that reading literally, quite literally, gives you critical thinking skills. And the fact that, let's just say you're already a beast with the street knowledge, man, you throw reading into that. Think about the last 10 or 15 subjects we've covered. You take the lessons from Danny Trejo, you take the lessons from El Chapo, you take the lessons from Robert Smalls, and if you just go off of those three men alone and you're reading on them and learning their lives and learning what they did right and did wrong, man, you are a force to be reckoned with. I know I always throw it back to this guy because after seeing the musical, I did a lot of research on him, and he became my favorite founding father in the barest sense that Alexander Hamilton was born a bastard orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, in the Caribbean, and quite literally on paper should never have risen above that station. But the fact that he educated himself and read everything he could and furthered his own knowledge of the world as much as he did, we're still talking about him to this day. That should never have happened, but he made it happen because he had the common sense, he had the street knowledge, and he had the reading to go with it.
Exactly, exactly. Like, we can't just act like reading ain't worth shit. We can't just live like that. And so many people are on that type of shit, unfortunately. Like, I just heard somebody recently, they were talking, I mean, I like their zeal and stuff for the state of the world and humanity and stuff, but they were basically talking about how they felt like AI was stupid and how it's ruining the earth and the natural state of stuff, and how we shouldn't learn about that, or we shouldn't learn about anything at all, really, and everything is just stupid and let's not learn, period. And it's like, I mean, yeah, let's not do that. Let's not be, I mean, let's not to be to the point to where we want to be basically animals that lay and sleep and shit in the woods, you know.
Right, there's a happy middle ground that maybe we don't need to make robots take over the world for us, but at the same time, you can't just turn your back on education totally. To say learning is dumb is the dumbest thing you could say.
Oh yeah, for a fact, for a fact. We're gonna keep educating ourselves and keep on fighting against reactions, you know?
And while we're on our education train, we'll pull it right into the station of Small's advocacy and his fight against the reactionary forces that be. Because Smalls translated his state level success into national office, serving 5 non consecutive terms as a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives. He represented South Carolina's 5th Congressional District from 1875 to 79, in 1882 to 83, and later the 7th Congressional District from 84 to 87. Smalls remained a loyal figure in the Republican Party, serving as a delegate to every Republican National Convention from 1872 through 1896. And before anybody gets crazy thinking, oh, he's a Republican, this was before they did the switch, so technically think of him as a Democrat. So, with all that being said, Smalls remained a loyal figure, as we said. And in Congress, Smalls focused on protecting the civil and political rights of African Americans against the rising tide of redemption and white supremacist violence. His legislative advocacy included several crucial, if often frustrated, attempts to promote equality on a national level. He introduced an amendment to abolish racial segregation within the Army, though this critical measure was ultimately ignored by Congress. He also supported infrastructure development in his district, playing a role in the passage of legislation that helped create the Parris Island Marine Corps base near Beaufort. Smalls possessed keen legislative foresight regarding the safety of black constituents in the South. In 1875, he spoke out passionately against the proposed transfer of federal troops out of the southern states. He correctly anticipated that the removal of federal protection would enable white paramilitary groups and Democratic opponents to implement schemes designed to disenfranchise black voters and terrorize the population. Smalls understood that the fight for integration and protection required the sustained presence of federal power. Smalls was one of the last African American congressmen from the South to serve before the complete disenfranchisement of black voters by the end of the century. His commitment to equality was unyielding, even as the Democratic Party systematically dismantled Reconstruction's gains through violence, black codes, and Jim Crow legislation. His greatest stand against the reaction came in 1895 when he served as one of the few black delegates to the state constitutional convention charged with revising the state charter. Smalls made a valiant defense of black political rights against the virulent demagoguery and sophisticated disenfranchisement schemes proposed by figures like George Tillman. Despite the systematic rollback of several civil rights, Smalls maintained a powerful defiance, refusing to succumb to pessimism. He offered a profound defense of his people to the South Carolina legislature, famously stating, "My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. This rhetoric underscored his belief in the intrinsic equality of African Americans and shifted the blame for societal failure directly onto the mechanisms of unequal opportunity. After completing his last term in Congress, Smalls secured a position of significant federal authority that allowed him to maintain political influence in the South long after the end of Reconstruction. He was appointed Collector of Customs for the Port of Beaufort in 1889 by President Benjamin Harris. This federal patronage position was instrumental in Small's enduring power. Although he temporarily lost the appointment during the Democratic administration of Grover Cleveland, he was reappointed by President William McKinley in 1898 and served continuously until around 1911 or 13. In total, Smalls served as customs collector for approximately 22 years. This exceptional tenure demonstrated his immense political skill and allowed him to successfully navigate the hostile Jim Crow social, political, and legal regime while holding powerful federal authority. The ability of Smalls to secure and retain this powerful federal role highlights the residual strength of the National Republican Party and the federal appointment systems, which created vital islands of black leadership and influence even after state governments had been overthrown by white supremacists. This position allowed Smalls to control federal operations and potentially distribute jobs and opportunities locally, insulating his community, in part from the worst excesses of the post-Reconstruction era. In the 1890s, Small declined offers for high-ranking positions, including a U.S. Army Colonel's Commission in the Spanish-American War and the prestigious post of U.S. Minister to Liberia.
It kind of makes you think because, I mean, in some regards, you don't really want to compare, but when you really look at certain things, just as far as him actually being in a government sanctioned place of power to where he's controlling and interfering in certain things as far as the welfare of his people, and he's making all these legendary quotes. In some instances, people can say I'm sure they can argue that it sort of puts their mind in more of a shock than just the whole MLK era. Because at that point, it's basically just asking to be accepted into a system and stuff like that. And I definitely don't want to downplay what Malcolm and even the Black Panthers and just the Nation of Islam as a whole was doing, because those people were overall condemning that system, But when it comes to this guy, he was within that system and he was making moves, he was making changes.
Well, and you got to think that you got to play the game that you're allowed to play the game. And when Malcolm came along, thanks to guys like Robert Smalls, you were able to take the board, flip it, and put the pieces how you wanted them in more of a sense than he was allowed to. I mean, the thing that kills me with this research that's like the most amazing, Robert Smalls essentially was doing what he was doing for the better part of half a century. That you think about if he retired in 1913, even if he retired in 1911, he was still 40 years away from the civil rights movement as we know it, which is incredibly impressive to me.
And like I said, none is better or worse necessarily than the other, because overall, when you look at it, the Garvey movement, the Black Panthers, and the Nation of Islam, three different ideologies, but one thing they had in common, they all provided food, shelter, and clothing for the Black community. Like Elijah Muhammad, I mean, has an iffy history, but that guy, he really had it going on. He had lots of businesses and shit. He really had it going on as far as that end. Lots of Black-owned businesses, like I said, during a time where that type of stuff was common, he was a big figure in that. And Malcolm was preaching that same kick as far as us being financially mature, financially independent, and stuff like that. He was working his way towards that when he was, started picking up the pieces for his own movement. But it's that same concept. Robert Smalls sort of laid the foundation for them to be able to do that.
And and this may be a polarizing position to be on, but even if everything people say about Elijah Muhammad is true, at the end of the day, does what happens in his personal life take away from the good that he did in the world,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have that type of conversation when people, even when you bring it to that fact, when you say, well, he still did lots of good, a lot of people will say, I mean, that doesn't, not only does that not take away from it, but that good probably, I would trade that good he did for him not doing this possibly. And him not doing this is, I mean, anytime you bring up an old man and like literally old man and girls who are younger than 18, it's like, damn, you know?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I just had to float it out there and let the community think about it. But that is incredibly fair. You're not wrong on that. And I mean, and not to justify what he did, but at the end of the day, that's why, as we were saying, education is important, reading is important, and learning is important because you start to learn that these figures aren't perfect people, that even someone who did the most good in the world has a past and probably did some fucked up shit, that everybody in the world is just as capable of being a Hitler as they are to being, I don't know, who's the opposite comparison, a Malcolm X, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I remember, and it's funny, when I remember reading about this in his autobiography, Malcolm himself said that it was like a movie the way Elijah Muhammad was talking to him in the scenery. He's kind of like walking with him alongside his pool, and he's explaining to him that just about certain biblical characters, how they had lots of women, and how Samson was brought to ruin by the woman who slept in his arms, stuff like that, and how he had to fulfill this prophecy. I mean, obviously it's a let on, but it kind of brings out a certain truths of lives. That's what I do appreciate about the Bible. It talks about certain stuff, how David was a good king, but well, no, it wasn't. Yeah, he slept with Bathsheba,
And didn't he
but
kill a man to sleep with her, if I remember correctly? Or let a
mhm.
man die to sleep with her?
Yeah, and Noah being accused of drunkenness and stuff. And the Bible kind of it says without explicitly saying that a man's great deeds to the public far outweigh his personal faults. That's basically what the Bible says without explicitly saying it. And that's something that I'm sure can be debated from here till kingdom come. But just an interesting thought.
It is, and now that you mention it, I mean, I get exactly what you're saying, that there's a difference between having, if Elijah Muhammad wanted to have 20 wives, I'm fine with that. But as you said, they have to be at least 18. And I don't appreciate anyone that uses the Quran, the Torah, or the Bible, or any other holy tome to justify what they're doing that they know is wrong.
Yeah, and no offense to all my Muslims out there, because remember the guy I told you about who kind of shouted us out on the YouTube and shit on Instagram and stuff. I think he's a Muslim, but the thing is, how many wives do you get in the afterlife? It's like 72, I think.
I believe so.
Like, think about it. Nobody. It kind of makes me think that number may be based on numerology, because from what they say, it is 72 names of God
That's
and
what I
shit.
was just about to say, is that it has to be. I think 100% you're dead on. And I think a lot of the esotericism of older religions comes from numerology for sure.
But it makes you think like nobody starts out at that number. It kind of makes you think like that's a number that they kind of came up with in the form of an auction or something like.
It's
They
quite
started at,
specific.
yeah, they started at 100, then it's like 50. No, not 50. 80, 80, 80. No, not 80. 75. 75 doesn't do much. 90. No, 71, 73, 72 done. Like something like that.
And I'll tell you what, having one wife, I can tell you 70, 72 more would be way, or 71 more. Hell, fucking one more would be too many.
Oh yeah, man. Do you know that the levels of hell you could catch with one?
Amen. Amen.
We got to tap into the fact that this motherfucker declined some high-ranking positions. That says a lot too on his mentality, and that he saw other things obviously is more important.
And it's sort of like we were saying with Crazy Horse. It's sort of like we were saying with guys like Hannibal and stuff, that it really speaks volumes to who you are as a man. As I was saying with that podcast I've been working on that we're going to do one day eventually on greatness. To be a great man means that, at least as far as being a good great man, instead of an evil great man, it always comes down to what you want to do for the community and not your own personal gain. If he had only looked out for himself, he might have gotten some real clout in his lifetime, but we wouldn't be talking about him today. And as someone that's versed in the Spanish American War, I'm sure you can vouch for the fact that if he took that position, he'd have probably had a real name for himself at the time.
Yeah, for a fact. And that's nothing to sneeze at because uh, a U.S. minister to Liberia, just to go there, period, but to have that rank to yourself, and man, a fucking commission in the Spanish American War, that I'm sure he would have played a big role in that too, because we've talked about that, and you know how I feel that was. I mean, it's definitely in the top 5, if not 3, of the not just the most consequential wars, but consequential moments in American and world history. I feel, because it took America from the place to where we were, to being a rising nation, to being an official world power.
And on top of all of that, to put it in perspective, if he took the position in the army, a colonel is the head of 3,000 to 5,000 men. So he would have been quite literally the only black man in America at that point, up to that point in time, to have had 5,000 white guys having to do exactly what he says.
Man, ain't that some shit right there? Like, I can't lie. I can't help but to feel some racial pride in that, because it's like this is not even 3 decades after the Emancipation Proclamation, you know?
And he was such a consequential figure that, and I tell you what, from the reading I did, I think it really was them trying to take that power he had away, because he was building a community, giving these jobs to his community. And essentially, they're saying, hey, you could be in charge of 5,000 white guys. Don't you want to do that? Wouldn't that be cool? And he's got the heart and the dignity and the respect for his position to realize, no, I don't want to do that, because this is the only way I can still help my community.
Right, right. It definitely put him in the right place. I'll
It,
say, put him
it,
in the right position.
it speaks power to the fear that people feel about the change you're making when they want to give you a devil's bargain in that way.
Oh yeah, an offer you can't refuse, so to speak. Sustaining power and enduring a legacy.
And exactly, because I'll tell you, you want to talk about somebody that knows a way through hell quite well. It's Mr. Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls dedicated the remainder of his life to public service, dying in his family home in Beaufort. He passed away from malaria and diabetes February 23rd, 1915, at the age of 75. Poignantly, he died in the house at 511 Prince Street, the very property behind which he had been born into slavery. Small's lifespan witnessed the most dramatic social and political shifts in American history, ranging from chattel slavery to emancipation, the establishment of male suffrage, service in the U.S. Congress, and the final tragic rise of the Jim Crow system. W.E.B. Du Bois famously summarized the tragedy of Reconstruction by noting that the slave stood for a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. Smalls, however, represents a compelling counter-narrative to this tragic arc. His economic solvency, combined with his judicial victory in the Supreme Court and his sustained political authority as customs collector, allowed him to stand in the sun until his death in 1915. He maintained tangible assets, federal influence, and legal security long past the general collapse of Reconstruction. And let me just note, dying in 1915, that means he quite literally lived from being a Civil War hero to the beginning of World War I.
Yeah, that's pretty dope. That's pretty dope. But overall, man, I can't lie. I think that was pretty poetic, that last little passage. I gotta go ahead and, tip off the hat to you, because it just shows how there's lots of importance in getting two or maybe even a few perspectives from history, from certain figures, Like if you read this guy, if you read Nietzsche, pick up some Kant too, and pick up some Schopenhauer, get to see how all these people view time in the world at certain places, so you can get a good view on what it really was, because lots of people really do take heed and take W.E.B. Du Bois' word for gospel when he said that the slave stood briefly in the sun, then returned to slavery. And because, I mean, obviously that has some truth to it, but that shouldn't be viewed as the universal appeal, because in lots of cases, the tracks were being laid down for us to enjoy the freedom that we later on enjoy with a vengeance, you know?
And you think about the foundation Robert Smalls was laying in him dying in 1915. You had the Harlem Hellfighters coming up right behind them to go make a name for themselves and change history for the black community just a few months after his death. It really is amazing to think about, like, how certain things in history linked together in certain time periods are so much closer than you really think they are. You had guys like him that really were, up until the 20th century, fighting to change the system that was working against them.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, for a fact. That was that was pretty deep. Oh, W.E.B. Du Bois. And speaking of which, while we're on this topic, and while we're speaking about different variations of history, this right here, it just shows how there's always another side, two sides to a coin, especially when it comes to people that history, quote unquote, wants to paint as being the guy who had the softer approach, who was less revolutionary, because they did that with Martin Luther King, of course. But if you really look at it, then this is a story for another day, maybe. The media leaves out a lot of stuff that Martin Luther King did or said that would be considered radical. W.E.B. Du Bois was he was often looked at the same way as the good Negro, so to speak. But if you ever read a book he had called Blood Within the Veil, he talks more radical, so to speak, and it just shows a new side of him. You know, it just shows there's always that. Just like how the supposedly quote unquote nonviolent civil rights movement, which it was to a certain degree, but at the same time, he had the deacons of defense. You know, he had armed security.
And you work with the tools that you have. That, if we're being honest, could Martin Luther King have pulled the same stops out that Malcolm X did if he was trying to get church groups to do it? You know, that I think he understood the community he was working within and knew how to get them to stand with him in a way that they could feel comfortable doing, if that makes sense.
And to King's credit, we did start to see the fruits of the labor of the civil rights movement not too long after. Like, and this is partly why shows like The Cosby Show started to spring up, because within the 80s, a black middle class did start to have a boom. And that was a lot thanks to the civil rights movement and certain privileges and things like that that came from it.
And not to get too off topic, but I do want to ask, while we're on the subject and I'm thinking on it, then, if MLK and Malcolm X didn't die as martyrs, do you think it would have had an effect on the civil rights movement as it wound up shaking out? Do you think that we would be in a different world today had neither one of them been martyrs?
Tell you the truth, yeah, if Malcolm still lived, I think he would have carried out some things that would have, like I said, sent the world in either way, in a different position. I think he would have definitely lived on to be a respected, cherished old elder of the black community. Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. I would love to see, because I'm sure he would be giving us his opinions on things like that. Like, I'd love to see what Malcolm X's opinions would be on stuff like BET and shit like that.
Can you imagine the Malcolm X podcast? Right.
Right, because I'm just thinking he was born in 1925, like around the year 2000 when the BET started to get popular and shit. He still would have been kicking. I could have pictured him like probably sitting on the couch and or something on one of those old BET shows. Now y'all gotta have some more positive representation on here, like shit like that.
Hey, depending on how, his diet and everything, he could have very well lived till we graduated high school if you think about it.
Oh yeah, for a fact. Mm, just thinking about that, Malcolm X still living during the times of cushion orange juice makes you think.
Right? It definitely, and just as you said, it'd be interesting to hear their takes on the world. That's why, yet again, it might be a polarizing view, but sometimes I hope there is an afterlife just so we can talk to all these motherfuckers we cover one day.
Oh yeah, we'll we'll get there. We'll get there some way somehow.
And someone that really got there was Mr. Smalls. His career represents an unparalleled transition from human chattel to national statesman. His achievements underscore how he successfully leveraged wartime notoriety and indispensable technical expertise into sustained political power. His enduring legacy has been recognized by both civilian and military authorities. He received a congressional citation for bravery in 1900, acknowledging his wartime heroism. Decades after the fact, the U.S. Army continues to recognize him as the archetype of the brave and resourceful soldier. Most significantly, in 2004, the U.S. Navy honored his pivotal contributions by christening a logistics support vessel, the Major General Robert Smalls, ensuring his name remains affixed to the maritime world he mastered.
Well, I guess that's something I guess I can say he probably wanted at one point in time, just to have your name on a ship.
Especially when shipping was the cornerstone to what made you who you were as a man throughout your whole life. Not only did it help you gain your freedom, it helped you change the community you lived in for the next half a century.
hmm And once again, I got to give you credit, just the poetic quality of the words from human chattel to national statesman. I mean, that says it all right there. Somebody who was literally born a slave at one point in time, and not too long down that road, he could be the basically one of the ambassadors for his nation.
And I know we did the comparison with Diego Rivera to Forrest Gump, but in a weird way, so was Robert Smalls because you think about all the interactions he had with presidents in his lifetime. That three different presidents were involved with his appointments, with him quite literally being the reason you had the Buffalo Soldiers, with him turning down offices to say, no, I want to keep this job because this is what's important to me. And just you think about it, what a crazy time to be involved in politics, really.
Oh yeah, it's truly a shame that no video cameras can capture it. I'll say that much.
And that's what makes history so fascinating in a way too, that when you read these books, when you do this research, when you sit here and read on certain figures or we do these podcasts on certain figures, you can't help but be like, I would love to have been a fly on the wall just for 5 minutes to see how that conversation went.
Oh yeah, if only we could be a fly on the wall to lots of shit,
I'm just
honestly.
I'm just picturing him sitting there going, man, yeah, I met with Lincoln. Big headed, weird ass motherfucker. Kept trying to touch my ass. Asked me if I wanted to wrestle 3 different times.
I could see that right there. And truthfully, I mean, Lincoln, what a character, But Robert Smalls, he lived that black Forrest Gump life for sure. And I mean, that's all the significance I guess he could ask for.
And you can't take away from his significance because let me do my Springer here. The life of Robert Smalls offers critical insights into the dynamics of black leadership during the Civil War and Reconstruction. His trajectory demonstrates the essential connection between technical competence, military heroism, economic independence, and sustained political power. Small's unique advantage lay in the dual role of his maritime economy. His forced mastery of piloting skills allowed him to execute a strategically critical act of self-emancipation. This naval expertise and subsequent service provided him the financial capital and prize money and political celebrity required to jumpstart his Reconstruction career. Later, the same expertise translated into his entrepreneurial ventures, such as the Enterprise Railroad, and ultimately his long-term federal appointment as collector of customs for the Port of Beaufort. His continued reliance on maritime sector provided an economic and political base less vulnerable to the agrarian political collapse that decimated inland black leadership during Redemption. Furthermore, Small's political focus was consistently structural and foundational. His tireless work to establish compulsory public education and the Land Commission in South Carolina aimed directly at dismantling the socioeconomic structures of the Old South by addressing illiteracy and land monopoly. His later congressional and rhetorical efforts against the troop withdrawal and military segregation further illustrate a visionary political platform that fully grasped the institutional and physical dangers facing African Americans decades before the mainstream civil rights movement. Robert Small's career thus serves as a definitive case study in self-determination and political persistence. He used the chaos of war to achieve freedom, harnessed federal power to establish progressive governance, and leveraged his personal reputation and federal appointment to maintain a position of authority and prosperity well into the age of Jim Crow. This is going to conclude our second of two parts on the man known as Robert Smalls, and I hope that what we brought out to light really lets you see what a powerful figure he was and why he's so worthy of learning about. I think that he's a true American hero. I think schools should teach him as more than just a footnote. And I hope this was as entertaining and educational for all of you as it was for us. This has been the Case So You Didn't Know podcast. Mr. Talberto, any closing thoughts, statements, anything you would like to plug, sir?
Just overall beautiful, man. I just think that's really one of the jewels of this show, just getting things out there that are not seen in a certain light that should be, hidden truths brought to light, and that's what it's all about. Look me up when you can, TOLBERT Simpson on Instagram, just overall keep supporting us, Believe the Cheese, world's most dangerous podcast, and you'll definitely be called in the next one.